Welcome to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you probably already know the mission. We take a stack of your sources, articles, research papers, your own notes, and we extract the absolute best nuggets of insight from them.
Right. It's basically a shortcut.
Exactly. It's your shortcut to being incredibly well-informed without having to actually sit down and read 100 pages of dense technical material. And today we are looking at a really comprehensive article from March 9th, 2026. It's titled White Label Skincare, a comprehensive buyer's guide to choosing a manufacturer, written by Laurent Fabian over at Ingredientsage.
And I have to say, it really is a phenomenal breakdown of an industry that, frankly, operates completely in the shadows for the average person who's just buying a serum off the shelf.
Yeah, you don't really think about it. But why should you, the listener, care about this? Well, whether you're an aspiring beauty founder trying to launch the next big indie brand, or maybe a business strategist analyzing market trends, or honestly just insanely curious about how the skincare industry actually works behind the scenes, this guide is the ultimate blueprint.
It really is. It moves way past the simple, kind of naive idea of just finding the cheapest factory to pump out lotion.
Oh, way past it. It reveals the hidden mechanics of regulatory compliance, the sheer chemistry required for ingredient stability, and how a brand actually scales globally. Okay, let's unpack this. There is a fundamental difference in this industry between simple private labeling and full turnkey partnerships.
Right. Huge difference.
Private labeling essentially means you are taking a manufacturer's existing, off-the-shelf stock formula, slapping your logo on it, and calling it a day.
Which is fine for some, but
But a turnkey partnership, that is a totally different beast. We are talking about end-to-end services, from concept all the way to the physical shelf.
And that distinction is the entire foundation of a successful brand today. The source actually includes this fantastic quote from Dr. Elena Rossi. She's the chief formulation scientist at the Beauty and Wellness Research Group.
Oh yeah, I highlighted that part. So good. She points out that indie brands entering this space absolutely must partner with manufacturers who provide, and this is a direct quote, end-to-end quality systems, transparent testing, and clear regulatory mapping. Clear regulatory mapping, that's huge.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the right white label partner is not just a vendor who's filling a jar for you. They are a strategic ally. They're the entity that shortens your timelines, dramatically reduces your regulatory risk, and ensures your customer gets the exact same experience whether they buy your product in New York, London, or Sydney.
So if they're really that important, how do you even begin to choose one? Because
Yeah.
clearly you can't just sort of spreadsheet of manufacturers by the lowest unit cost and hit go.
No, that is a recipe for disaster.
Right. The source lays out a really detailed framework for evaluating these providers. You can't just pick based on price. It provides 7 crucial pillars, and it starts heavily on the concepts of rules and quality.
Naturally. I mean, a credible supplier has to prove they actually follow the rules. The baseline expectation is that they have regional regulatory compliance alignment, along with very specific certifications. The big ones mentioned in the article are GMP and ISO 22716.
Wait, before we dive deeper into the chemistry and stuff, for anyone who might not be steeped in manufacturing jargon, what exactly does ISO 22716 entail? Is that just a generic factory safety standard, like wearing hard hats?
Good question. No, it is highly, highly specific. ISO 22716 is the international standard specifically for good manufacturing practices, or GMP, in the cosmetics industry.
Okay.
It dictates exactly how products should be produced, controlled, stored, and shipped to ensure quality and safety. But having that certificate framed on the wall, that's just step one. What this source really stresses is the absolute need for an airtight audit trail.
Meaning they document everything.
Everything. A credible manufacturer tracks it all, from the moment a raw botanical extract enters their loading dock to the exact second the finished cream goes into a shipping box.
This source has a really practical piece of advice here that I loved. It says you should actively ask a potential partner for their recent audit reports and a sample COA, a certificate of analysis.
Yes, the COA is vital.
Because you want to see the actual paperwork that proves identity, potency, and contamination controls. It's one thing for a salesperson to promise you they have high standards. It's another entirely to see how they document and resolve a chemical inconsistency on a random Tuesday.
That paperwork is literally your only safety net. And that level of scrutiny has to apply to their operational capacity as well. That's another pillar. You have to evaluate their production capacity and lead times.
Right, because if they can't make the product when you need it, you're dead in the water.
Exactly. You have to ask, do they keep buffer stocks for critical ingredients?
Yeah.
Because global supply chains are notoriously fragile right now.
And what happens when things inevitably change? The source specifically notes you should negotiate realistic change control provisions.
That's such an important detail.
Because think about it, if you launch a product and you get immediate customer feedback that the fragrance is way too strong and you need to pivot mid-cycle, you need a partner who can actually adjust the production schedule without bankrupting you.
Which brings us directly to the financial reality, the next pillars. Pricing models and minimum order quantities, or MOQs. You need a completely transparent cost structure. A vital tip from the author here is to request a cost worksheet that is mapped to a 3-quarter and full year forecast.
Not just the first batch.
Right. You need to see exactly how your unit economics will shift as you scale from a modest initial test run to full mass production.
That makes total sense. You're plotting out the long game. The source also digs into pillars 5, 6, and 7, which cover the scope of customization from the base formulas to the fragrance profiles, even multilingual labeling, packaging, sustainability, and testing.
Yes, and they bring up something really interesting. In-house R&D.
Having a manufacturer with their own research and development lab accelerates the whole pipeline. But the source warns that you have to insist on a documented stability protocol.
A stability protocol is where the chemistry meets the real world. They need to test how the formula reacts to extreme temperature changes, humidity, and prolonged light exposure over very defined intervals.
It makes me think of an analogy. Building a skincare brand is remarkably similar to building a custom house.
Oh, I like that.
You wouldn't just look at the price of the bricks and sign the contract. You'd demand to see the architect's blueprints. You'd check the plumber's state licenses. You'd want to know exactly what the contractor's contingency plan is if a massive storm hits right in the middle of pouring the foundation.
You have to know the structure is rock solid before you even think about picking out the paint color.
Exactly.
And to push that house analogy even further, the building codes for that house change completely depending on what country you happen to be building it in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are stepping into the global regulatory minefield because a moisturizer that is perfectly legal to sell in California might get your entire company fined and pulled from shelves in France. The laws are wildly different. Let's start with the United States.
The landscape in the U.S. is quite unique compared to the rest of the world. Cosmetics are governed by the FDA, but there is absolutely no pre-market approval process.
Wait, seriously, so anyone can just mix up a batch of face oil in their kitchen, put it in a bottle, and start selling it online without getting a stamp of approval first?
Essentially, yes. The burden of proof in the U.S. is entirely on the brand, not the government. You don't need the FDA's permission to launch. However, the core rule is that your claims must be truthful and not misleading.
Right.
Your labeling has to include all ingredients in descending order of predominance, plus the net weight.
So they don't check your work beforehand, but if you mess up, the hammer comes down.
A very heavy hammer. And it's not just the FDA. Any claims you make about clinical or cosmetic benefits fall under the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC.
The FTC gets involved.
Oh, absolutely. If you go on social media and claim your lotion cures acne or erases wrinkles without rigorous clinical data to back it up, you open yourself up to severe charges of misbranding.
That sounds like a massive liability. Now, contrast that Wild West approach with the European Union and the UK. Reading through the source, it sounds like a completely different universe over there.
It's night and day. The EU operates under the Cosmetics Regulation 1223/2009. You cannot simply launch a product and hope for the best. By law, you must compile and maintain a safety assessment and a massive document called a Product Information File, or PIF.
Then this source mentions something called a responsible person. What does that actually mean in a legal sense?
It means exactly what it sounds like. Every single cosmetic product sold in the EU must have a designated responsible person residing within the Union. This is an individual or a legal entity who is personally and legally on the hook for the product's compliance.
Oh.
If a product causes a severe allergic reaction and the paperwork isn't in order, the regulatory bodies know exactly whose door to knock on.
That is intense. And you can't even put the product on a shelf without telling the government first, right? The source mentions CPNP notification.
Cosmetic Products Notification Portal, yes. You have to register the product in that centralized database before it ever reaches a consumer. And post-Brexit, The UK rules align closely but require their own specific UK adaptations.
So if you want to sell in London, you need a specific UK responsible person separate from your EU contact.
Exactly.
It's exhausting just thinking about the paperwork. And the source doesn't stop there. What about Canada and Australia?
More specific hurdles. Canada mandates bilingual labeling, English and French, are non-negotiable, along with highly specific disclosures regarding potential allergens. Australian enforces the National Cosmetics Standard, which has its own rigid ingredient restrictions.
So the real takeaway for the listener here is pretty clear. If you have any ambition to take your brand international, your manufacturing partner absolutely must possess a regional regulatory playbook.
They have to.
If they don't already know how to map out safety substantiations for the EU versus Australia, your launch is basically dead on arrival. You cannot figure this stuff out through trial and error.
You really can't. The financial stakes are simply too high. And navigating those regulations ties directly into the actual chemistry of the product. Consumers today are highly educated. They read labels. They demand evidence-backed claims and complex, trending active ingredients.
I'm so glad you brought that up because this is the fun part, what is actually inside the bottle.
Yeah.
But you can't just throw a trendy buzzword into a vat of cream and call it a day. The manufacturer has to prove the chemistry holds up and remains stable. The source dives into several of these trending actives. Let's look at bakuchiol first. It seems to be absolutely everywhere lately.
It has seen explosive growth. It's marketed as a natural, plant-based alternative to retinol. It offers similar anti-aging benefits like encouraging cell turnover, but with significantly less irritation, which makes it highly appealing for the sensitive skin demographic.
But the source outlines a major caveat for formulators working with it, right? It isn't just plug and play.
Far from it. Bakuchiol requires intense stability assessment. The crucial practical tip from the source is that a brand must test bakuchiol stability in light-sensitive packaging.
Because light breaks it down.
Exactly. You can't just test it in a dark lab. You have to run stability tests in the actual target packaging to ensure the efficacy doesn't degrade before the consumer even buys it.
That makes sense. Another massive trend is niacinamide. It's in practically everything right now for barrier support. I know it plays well with a lot of things, but what are the hidden challenges there?
Well, niacinamide does have a beautifully documented safety profile, which formulators love. However, the challenge arises when you combine it with certain antioxidants. The manufacturer has to constantly run viscosity and texture checks.
Viscosity checks?
Yeah, because adding niacinamide can drastically alter the physical feel of a formulation, turning a silky serum into a sticky mess if the base compatibility is invalidated.
No, nobody wants a sticky serum. Let's move to vitamin C. I feel like this is the one ingredient everyone knows, but it is notoriously finicky. I can't tell you how many times I bought a very expensive vitamin C serum, forgotten about it for 2 months, and suddenly it's turned brown and smells faintly of hot dog water.
That is the perfect example of oxidation. Pure L-ascorbic acid, which is the traditional form of vitamin C, is highly unstable when exposed to air, light, or water. It degrades rapidly, which changes the color and creates that distinctly unpleasant odor you mentioned.
So how are modern manufacturers actually solving that?
The industry shift is toward vitamin C derivatives. The source highlights ascorbyl glucoside and tetrahexyldecyl ascorbate. These derivatives are significantly more stable than L-ascorbic acid.
But they still need protection.
Oh, absolutely. The physical packaging remains non-negotiable. The source explicitly advises using airless packaging with UV protection for any liquid vitamin C derivative. If you put a brilliant vitamin C formula in a clear glass dropper bottle because it looks chic on Instagram, you are actively destroying the product.
Form over function fails every time here. What about peptides? They are huge in the anti-aging space.
Peptides are powerful chains of amino acids, but it's a very crowded, very expensive space. The source warns that peptides require robust stability testing and highly clear concentration disclosures.
And the practical tip there?
Formulators advise starting with a conservative concentration early on. You let the initial stability data guide you before you try to maximize the percentage.
Got it. Rounding out the chemistry side, the article details ceramides and squalane. These are staples for sensitive skin. Ceramides are basically the mortar that holds our skin cells together, but the source notes you have to be very specific about how you list them.
Yes, you should see specific nomenclature on the label, like ceramide NP, AP, or EOP. And chemically, they must be paired with humectants like glycerin or hyaluronic acid to form correctly. But the biggest manufacturing hurdle with ceramides is phase stability.
Phase stability meaning the product literally separating.
Exactly. An emulsion separating into layers of oil and water. A manufacturer must test the ceramide formula across extreme temperature fluctuations. Think about the real-world logistics. Your product might sit in a freezing warehouse in Chicago and then spend 3 days in a sweltering delivery truck in Texas. The formula has to survive that journey intact.
That is such a vivid picture. And finally, there is squalane. Great for lightweight moisture and oxidative stability. But the source focuses on the commercial side of this ingredient. Consumers today demand traceability.
They really do. The practical tip is to opt for sustainably derived, plant-based sources like olive-derived squalane, rather than historically derived sources like shark liver.
What's fascinating here is that this intense consumer demand for traceability and transparency bleeds directly into the next major hurdle, the physical product itself: packaging, labeling, and quality control.
Packaging is actually regulatory commitment, not just an aesthetic choice.
Right. The sourceless materials like airless pumps, jars, droppers, PET, HDPE, glass, and PCR. I see PCR thrown around a lot in marketing. That stands for post-consumer recycled plastics.
Correct, but here is the trap. Your choices must align with product texture, and protection needs UV, air, moisture. And if you want to make eco-claims about that PCR plastic, the source dictates you need material safety data sheets, or MSDS, and third-party life cycle analyses.
You can't just greenwash it. You have to bring the receipts. And that emphasis on proof brings us to quality control, or QC, the absolute non-negotiables of the QA process.
The source details the need for documented batch records and strict standard operating procedures, or SOPs. You must have explicit release criteria.
Meaning there is a literal, scientifically backed checklist that determines the exact moment a vat of lotion is legally declared good to release to the public.
Precisely. Microbial testing is mandatory to ensure no bacteria grew during production. But the most critical advice the source offers here is utilizing independent third-party labs.
Because it removes the conflict of interest.
Exactly. When an independent lab provides the certificate of analysis, it builds immense trust with consumers and retailers. And tying that all together is end-to-end traceability. If an adverse reaction does happen in the market, your recall readiness relies entirely on being able to trace that bad reaction back to a specific batch of raw ingredients.
So what does this all mean for the business side? We've covered the global laws, the volatile chemistry, the packaging constraints. Let's talk money and strategy. How does the actual deal get made? The source breaks down pricing structures into two main buckets: co-pack versus private label.
It's a crucial distinction. Co-packing arrangements offer more customization, but come with different setup costs. You might bring your own custom fragrance to mix into their base. Private labeling usually means adopting their standard product.
Right, and regarding those costs, a transparent price breakdown is mandatory. You obviously need the base unit price, but what about the setup fees for formulation or packaging artwork? Are there customization surcharges, sampling costs, warehousing fees?
Those hidden fees will absolutely destroy your margins if you don't map them out. And equally important to protecting your money is protecting your ideas, intellectual property, or IP.
The warning in the text is incredibly stark here. Your non-disclosure agreements must be flawlessly explicit.
Your contracts need crystal clear terms detailing who actually owns the final formula and exactly what happens if the partner underperforms or misses deadlines.
Which perfectly sets up the go-to-market strategy. Because even if you have a legally watertight contract, speed to market is the lifeblood of this industry.
The source highlights something called convergent design review cycles.
What is that?
Essentially, instead of a slow, linear process, you have parallel tracks. You're finalizing design proofs while simultaneously running regulatory compliance checks. It drastically reduces the time it takes to get from a concept to a physical shelf.
And the channel you choose dictates your whole strategy. If you're launching direct-to-consumer D2C, you are relying heavily on educating your buyers on actives. But if you're trying to get into wholesale, it's a totally different game.
Wholesale requires incredibly standardized SOUs and retailer-ready documentation.
And wrapping up that strategy is the concept of certifications. Cruelty-free, vegan, organic. These are massive trust builders, but the source warns heavily against overclaiming.
Certifications must be substantiated. You can use them to build out brilliant influencer playbooks, but if you overclaim, you're asking for a regulatory nightmare.
Wow. We have traversed a massive amount of territory today. To summarize this deep dive for you, choosing a white label partner is about finding a highly technical, profoundly transparent ally. You're looking for someone who can navigate global regulations, stabilize complex ingredients, and scale your economics from concept to shelf.
I think the most vital overarching lesson from the source is that while speed to market is an undeniable advantage, it should never come at the expense of safety, product efficacy, or brand integrity.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Throughout this entire dive, we have seen an intense emphasis on documentation from the source, COAs, PIFs, audit trails. Right now, we're used to consumers demanding to see the ingredient list on the back of the bottle. But as education grows, what happens if the future of beauty requires brands to publicly publish their COAs, their stability tests, and their safety assessments? If the ultimate flex becomes total supply chain transparency, how many brands on your shelf today would actually survive the scrutiny? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.